We still have a few more people waiting in the reception to join in, but I think in the interest of time and respect to those that came in early, we can start now. My name is George Makore. I'm the Deputy Chief of Party for the USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub, known as the USAID Trade Hub in short. Welcome to our third session in the series of Agoa webinars that we have been running. And this one is specifically going to be looking at food and beverages, beverage exports. So we are actually going to be looking at what needs to be done, what is important, and what we all have to look at in order to take advantage of the African Growth and Opportunity Act program, Agoa, which allows us to export over 6,400 product lines to the United States without paying any duty. That's what the program does, and we'll get more of that information as we go on through the day. Now, if I could take this opportunity to just highlight who we are, for those that are interacting with the USAID Trade Hub for the first time, we are a USAID funded project based in Pretoria, and we have presence in 7 other countries outside South Africa, and these countries are what we call our focus countries, and they include Eswatini, former Swaziland, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa itself, Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia. I like to call them SACU +3. So we're looking at the 5 SACU countries, for those that know about SACU, and then the 3 countries outside SACU, which are Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia. So those are the 5 countries, the 8 countries we operate in. And we do have presence in all those countries. Later on during the program, we're going to be, we'll show you who is best where, so that you can actually know the people that are in your country that represent the USAID Trade Hub. In case you want to reach out to them, we will also provide their contact details. Now, as a project, and I emphasize the name, the word project, because for those that know that any project has a lifespan, and it's important for us as a project to ensure that we do have organizations that we work with that can actually be able to continue to run with the activities that we are running together with you post the project period. Now, we look at 3 main objectives or areas that we work in. And the first one is to work with the 7 countries outside South Africa, the ones that I mentioned, in order to get them to trade more with South Africa. So we work with companies in those countries that have products that are in demand in South Africa that can actually then be exported to South Africa. So that particular objective is aimed at increasing exports from the 7 Southern African countries into South Africa. And there are reasons why we do that. Other than the demand from the South African companies and the population in South Africa, we also realize that some of the companies in South Africa do need raw materials that they can actually then process for export to other countries, and the countries that we work in serve that purpose as well. So linked to that, it brings us to our other objective, which is the main reason why we are here, which is basically promoting companies or products from the region to be exported to the United States under Agoa. So all the 8 countries, we look at the products that are part of the 6,400 products that I mentioned, that we can actually then assist those countries, companies with products that can actually be exported to the US under that program. And that is the basis or the reason why we are here today, to learn more about how that can be done, so that we can then take advantage of the opportunities provided under that unilateral trade preference program. And lastly, we realize that companies do face some challenges when it comes to funding that they would need to be able to produce, funding that they would need to be able to export, and take care of other requirements that will make them able to export. And our role there is we link companies that need funding with companies in South Africa or firms in South Africa that have that funding, and they are willing to invest in the region, in the 7 countries that I mentioned. And we can actually link up companies with in the 7 countries with potential funders in South Africa who can actually then be able to assist in that area. So those are our 3 main objectives as the USAID Trade Hub. We, however, have a 4th objective in Zambia, which is mainly it's only for Zambia, and it looks at assisting Zambia to have to comply with the WTO World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement. And we do have a team in Zambia that works on that. So Zambia, in addition to the 3 objectives that I mentioned, they also have that objective that our Zambia team that they work on. So that's what the hub does, and that's who we are. And we've been in existence as a project since October 2016. And like I said, we are a 5-year project. Now, moving on to today's session, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Cosmas, who is going to take us through that session. But before I do that, I would just like to take us through the roadmap or the agenda for the day, just to highlight what is going to be happening after starting from now until the end of this webinar, which is we hope that we won't keep you beyond 5 o'clock. After my talk, I'm going to be followed by Cosmas Mamunze, who is our portfolio manager for the project, and he is in charge of Botswana, Namibia, and Malawi as a portfolio manager. He is going to be the main man in terms of moderating our session today. We do have a lineup of very experienced participants today who are going to help us with our webinar. The first one is Janet Forrest. She is a consultant who is working with the hub to help us with, who is working with the USAID Trade Hub to help us with the development of an Agoa toolkit, which we do hope is going to be very useful to the most of you here. And Cosmas will actually introduce Jan Forrest after my talk. We also have Quelly Anderson. Quelly works for Registrar Corp, which is an organization that is based in the US. Some of you have had the interactions with Quelly because she has been out here a number of times in the region to talk about US market entry requirements. Then we have Ruby. Ruby works for a very close organization to the hub in terms of our partner, particularly when it comes to working with companies wanting to export to the US, and Cosmas will say more about that. And then we have McGregor. Again, is one. He works for one of our very close partners, is the USAID Trade Hub, and Cosmas will say more about him. And once our presenters are done, we will have an interactive session where we're going to have questions that you are going to be, the team is going to respond to. I urge you to put your questions in the chat there, in the chat box, so that we can then try and attend to as many questions as possible. In the event that we are not able to answer all your questions, we'll be able to respond to your questions in writing. We will get the team that is here to respond to all your questions. So if your question is not responded to during the session, please don't be discouraged. We will still be able to respond to your questions in writing. So I urge you to ask all your questions through the chat box. And then we will then end the day with next steps and closing remarks. And like I said earlier, we hope that we won't keep you past 5 o'clock. With that, let me ask Cosmas to take over. Cosmas, I wish you fruitful discussions during this webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, George, for the introductory remarks. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to mention just a few things. The first being that note that the presentations will be shared with participants via email. In most cases, participants will ask, the presentation is going to be emailed. Yes, we are going to do that. And secondly, just to reiterate what George indicated, please type in your questions in the session chat box, because there's an event chat box, then there's a session chat box. So now my role is very simple today. We've got an excellent lineup of experts on Agoa and on exporting specialty foods to the United States under the same trade framework. So let me start by introducing Janet Forrest. So Janet is an experienced customs lawyer. She has got extensive experience working with USAID and USAID projects. She's currently assisting, like George has indicated, she's currently assisting USAID Trade Hub with the development of an Agoa toolkit. So Janet today will unpack the overall Agoa legal framework for us. Janet, the screen is yours. Over to you.
Okay, I need to put up my PowerPoint there. Okay.
Nina, do you need your assistance? This could help.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not showing up.
Hi, Jen.
Let's have Sepiso assist you.
Okay.
Thanks, Sepiso.
Yeah, it's
Jen, you can
not
go
there.
through it like we did the last time by following through the monitor button.
Yeah, I
Then
did that.
under your entire screen,
Mm-hmm.
is the presentation visible there?
No.
Yeah, just click on it and then click share.
It's not my PowerPoint.
Yeah, so now you click on the PowerPoint icon at the bottom.
Okay.
Just maximize the screen. There you
Okay.
go.
Is that working now?
Yes.
Okay. But only if I maximize it, right?
Yes, you need to maximize it.
Did I stop?
Yes, you stop.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There. How about that? Is that good?
Yeah, it's up.
Okay.
You may want to do the slideshow.
I've already got it in slideshow.
Okay. Then you
So,
can. Okay.
yeah, I can go. Okay, so I'm going to, sorry about that technical stuff, but I am going to talk to you about basic US customs laws and how they will impact you exporting to the US, and then some specific things about the African Growth and Opportunity Act. The Trade Hub, as I think someone said before, is developing an Agoa toolkit, and this is for use by trade promotion agencies and firms. And this toolkit consists of an export manual, which covers all of the issues that could come up with exporting to the US, and also four briefers, which are one-page documents on specific subjects. I'll start here with, there are several key documents that you need for US entry. Entry summary, right to make entry, you need to have a bond, and you need to have a commercial invoice and a packing list. And I'll show you some of those. This is the entry summary form. And as you can see, there's a lot of information you fill in at the top. And then down by line 27 and 28, you describe the merchandise. And this is very, very important that the description is correct. And the description of the merchandise has to be correct, quantity and weight. But really, really important is that the HTS number is correct. And if you are using Agoa, okay, yeah, so that you just need that HTS number for food and beverage products. And then the entered value, I'll go over that a little bit more. And then the next column is the rate of duty, and then the total duty. This is a customs bond form. You can make a single transaction bond or a continuous bond, which is effective for a period of time. You need a bond because otherwise customs cannot release your merchandise before payment of duties. So this is very important in the modern world. This is a commercial invoice. Customs does not require a specific format for this, but this is a good idea of what needs to be there. Again, the product description needs to be very detailed, and the harmonized code should be correct. These are the steps for entering the US. First, you need to determine classification, then the value of the products, then the country of origin, then whether they are admissible, and finally, whether they are eligible for Agoa. This classification is very important. It'll help you to determine the rate of duty. These are some aids to determining classification for merchandise. The first one is the current US tariff schedule. And then the second one is customs rulings, which I'm going to talk a little bit about too. First, you need to look at the current tariff. But if you're having problems determining where your product fits, you could look at customs rulings, and that'll give you some idea of some of the issues related to classification. And then finally, there's an online search tool that the USITC puts out, and you can also use that. The customs rulings are really important. Where you see the search box, you enter the product that you're looking for, or maybe the tariff number, and it'll help you, it'll bring up a lot of rulings, and it'll help you to determine what is the right part of the tariff to look for your product. Sometimes it's obvious with fruits and vegetables maybe, but sometimes it's not at all obvious. And so if you look over these rulings, you'll get a sense of how customs classifies those products. Here's an example. I worked on a project that involved dried fruit bars from Ghana, and they initially, I'll go to this slide, they initially were told by their broker that they would have to pay 14.9% in duties. As you can see down there, mixtures, 14.9% is not eligible for Agoa, whereas 5.6%, the provision above, is eligible. So we had to argue that they did not fit in that first category. I mean, in that second category, I'm sorry. And that we had to do that by arguing that they were in airtight containers, that any citrus products were de minimis and shouldn't count. Anyway, that ended up being a successful argument. And then some of the products ended up classified in this 0813 as other fruit. And you can see the D in the column. So let me just have you look at this a little bit. The heading is in the far left column. Then there's the article description. And then we have the duty rates. General duty, special duty, and column 2 duty. What you need to do is you start, like on this page, you would start with fruit, and then you compare, this one isn't a very good example, this is better. You compare items at the same indentation level in order to determine everything under these numbers has to fit under that paragraph at the top. Fruit, nuts, etc. But then you start looking at various descriptions below that are more specific. And that's how you end up at the right tariff number, and that's where you get the duty rate. This is the ruling that I filed for this company in Ghana that was exporting fruit bars, and they initially thought they were going to have to pay 14.9% duty, so they decided not to even do this business. And then after they got the ruling in their favor, they're now shipping lots and lots of product to the US. The next issue is valuation. And it's generally going to be transaction value, which is the price paid or payable, and that is generally going to be the invoice price. There are some exceptions to that, but you can be pretty sure, I think it's something like 95% of entries are valued at invoice price. There's some other methods that can be used, especially if you have related parties and you cannot use transaction value. Next topic is country of origin. The non-preferential rules are used for determining whether you fit in column 1 duty rates, which is most favored nation duty rates, and for marking the product with its country of origin. And this general rule is that the country of origin is the country of manufacture, production, or growth. And it is possible to change the country of origin if a substantial transformation occurs in a second country. Substantial transformation means that you have to produce a new article with a different name, character, and use. The next issue is admissibility. This is especially important for food and beverage products. Some are prohibited entirely, but mostly food and beverage products will be restricted, which means they'll require a license or permit or to follow certain requirements of the Food and Drug Administration. Customs enforces this at the border. So if you bring in your product and you don't have the proper license or permit, they will not let your goods in. So it's very important to check out these FDA and USDA websites to find out what you need to do. Now I'm going to turn to Agoa, and it's generally based on the GSP system. GSP has been around for many years, 40, 50, I'm not sure how many. And it applies to countries all over the world. And they are all sort of lesser developed countries. And this program has been used for years and years, but it doesn't apply to things like textiles. And so Agoa came out in 2000, and it adds a lot more products to the eligibility. Agoa is basically all of the products eligible for GSP, plus 1,800 more. And the most significant one really for Africa is the textiles and apparel, because the duty rates on those products are extremely high. To qualify under Agoa, the country has to be eligible, and you find that out by looking in there's a General Note 16 to the tariff schedule, lists all the countries that are eligible for Agoa. And then the product must be eligible. And in this case, for food and beverages, you look at the classification in the tariff schedule, and then you look for a special program indicator D in the special column. Textiles are treated differently. They have special rules that are in Chapter 98. Another requirement is that it must be imported directly, which means direct shipment from Africa to the US. What this means is if you go through Europe, for example, you cannot enter the commerce of another country. It's possible to transit through, but not to enter the commerce. And then also you must meet all the requirements of the origin rules. And for non-textile products, you have to meet both requirements of the GSP rules. It has to be a growth product or manufacture or substantially transformed in a beneficiary country. And there are certain requirements for substantial transformation. It cannot be simply combining or packaging. And in addition to that, you have to meet the 35% value requirement. And that's the sum of the direct costs of processing, which can be very broad. It includes labor, it includes electricity for the factory, it can include management and all kinds of things. But that plus the cost or value of materials has to equal at least 35% of the value of the article when it enters the US, so the appraised value. These are some key products from some of the countries that we're talking about. There's a lot of fruit and nut products that are doing pretty well under Agoa. This will be part of the presentation that you get, so you'll be able to take a look at this. To summarize, most of the countries in Africa are not using Agoa. very, very much. And there's a lot of ways that it could be used to a greater amount. And some of those challenges are that there's lack of knowledge on the advantages and how to benefit. There's a lot of lack of knowledge of how the specific rules work for Agoa, lack of cooperative structures within countries like organizations of handicraft manufacturers. This is important because the quantity can be a big issue. If someone from the US is buying product, they may want to have a really large amount of the product. And so you might have to be working with other countries to meet their quantity requirements. There's also a need to have more investment in key sectors. For example, in several of the countries, raw hides, leather, are shipped, but there's not much advantage in shipping the raw hides. What's much better is to make leather goods like handbags and shoes and things like that. And the fourth challenge is the distance to market, and it can take 4 to 6 weeks for sea freight to reach the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thanks so much for the presentation. Janet presented to us regarding the steps that we need to take. Documentation, lot of documentation there, as you might be aware. Exportation is documentation. There's no way goods will move across borders in the absence of the relevant documentation. So thank you so much, Janet. Next up is Quelly Anderson. Quelly, are you here? I understand she had some challenges. If she's not yet here, we can move on to, okay. All right.
Yes, challenges, but can you hear me okay?
Okay, so let me introduce Quelly Anderson. Quelly needs no introduction actually to most people on this call. She, like George has indicated, she has been around. I was telling her that she deserves a SADC passport. She's extensively worked with the USAID Trade Hub on FDA awareness. She covered Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Zambia. In South Africa, she went as far as Polokwane, Eastern Cape, Cape Town, and Durban. So FDA is a deal breaker when it comes to exporting food products to the US. So Quelly will help demystify some of the misconceptions around FDA compliance. Quelly, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Kos, and thank you everyone for having me. I think it's very properly stated that FDA can cause problems if you don't know the regulations. It's the #1 reason why when I'm traveling around the world, people tell me that they don't export to the US, and it's because they don't understand the regulations, they fear the regulations, and so we're gonna demystify that, as Kos said, because when you really know them, they're not hard. You just need to follow them, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. So I think without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here, and let me just get this open and go here. And you tell me when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen now, Quelly.
Okay, you can see it, and we want to do slideshow maybe. Okay, all right. How to export to the food and beverage to the United States and comply with US FDA regulations. I'm going to, like I said, I travel all over the world and I speak to companies, And, you know, they're very simple things that we have to do here. And we're going to look at registration. That used to be the most basic and easiest thing to do. FDA has added a few extra steps to that, so we want to address that. We're going to talk about prior notice, food canning, labeling, food safety. Under FSMA, there's some new regulations that have come out, but all the deadlines have passed, so they're no longer really new anymore. We're going to talk about HACCP, and then we'll do a question and answer period. So first of all, the food facility registration. This is the document that basically lets FDA know what you're doing at your facility. It lets you know where the food is coming from. It's an 11-digit number, and it says that either you manufacture, process, pack, or store food for animal or human consumption. You know, I get calls all the time and people say, well, do I need to register? You know, I'm the brand owner of the product, but I don't manufacture, I don't process or pack at my location. I outsource that activity. Well, then the answer is you don't register unless you manufacture, process, package, or store the food for animal or human consumption. And on top of that registration, if you're outside of the US, then you have to have a US agent. Now, food facilities that are exempt, like we were just talking about, trading companies, personal residents, transportation only, farms, retail food establishments, fishing vessels, and so on, they don't need to register. USDA regulated facilities do not need to register. So these entities are exempt. And just to point out, you know, farms are a little tricky because if you have a farm and you just grow and send, you don't register. But if you have a farm and you do any type of processing or packaging on that farm, it then does take you to a level of registration. So I do want to point that out to you that, you know, in some cases you do have to do that. Facility registrations. A long time ago, it used to be that you would get your food facility registration and you'd have the number for life. Now FDA says, you know what, let's make them update this. Let's update the registration because maybe your activities have changed, maybe your ownership has changed. Something, it allows the facility to update and keep FDA's records updated properly. So they instituted this regulation a few years ago that says you must renew every 2 years on an even numbered year. So that's what we have here. So we always tell people, please remember, it's something so easy to forget, especially if somebody in your company is managing that and they leave the company, someone forgets in the even number year. As you know, we're in 2020 right now. So if you have an FDA registration, please renew it. Now, there's another step that FDA added. Now, first it used to be that you would register and you were registered for life. But now it is you have to register and you have to renew. Well, now the additional step is if you are a foreign facility and you're registered, then you would have to designate a U.S. agent. And with that U.S. agent, FDA will not confirm your registration until that U.S. agent that you've selected inside of your registration has confirmed the designation. Now, what does that mean? That means if you choose somebody, and it has to be somebody in the United States being a U.S. agent for your company, if you choose them, an email will go out from FDA and it will say, please verify that Lisa or Quelly Stubbs Anderson, you've been chosen as U.S. agent for this particular company in South Africa. If I don't confirm that designation, the registration will not be renewed. So make sure that when you're choosing your U.S. agents, you understand that this can affect your registration. It will not complete itself if that person does not confirm. And it's a pretty big deal. That's a big step. A simple step again, but it could be the difference in you having your registration completed or it being canceled. Okay, so look at some registration statistics here. We've got registrations. These are food facility registrations out of some African countries and some area surrounding countries. You'll see South Africa in 2016 was at 1,004, and now it's at 797. And this kind of goes down. So you'll see that a lot of these registrations have dropped off. And the reason for that is a lot of times people don't renew them properly. They, again, fear FDA and decide not to do business. And we really encourage people, if you're serious about the US market, go ahead and get your registration. I mean, it's the simplest thing to do, but it shows a lot of commitment to the market. And it shows a potential buyer that you're serious. Because that's kind of an important thing. It's your calling card, your registration, to have that. Okay, prior notice. This is something that usually your custom broker will handle, or your importer could handle. And it's basically just notifying the FDA that your product is coming to the United States. A long time ago, products would come and they would just sit at the port and nobody knew what they were. So FDA said, let's institute prior notice. And this is just like the term or the word says, you're giving prior notice that your product is coming. And you must do this. A lot of people ship and sometimes forget to do this. Hopefully the custom broker will catch that for you. But a lot of times you can tell the custom broker you're doing it. And if it doesn't get done, then it can cause a detention with your shipment. Okay, so for any of us in the audience that has food that is in a jar or a can, you're going to have to follow an additional registration. So you have the normal registration that we just discussed for any food and beverage company. But this one also is called a food canning establishment registration. And this is for low acid canned foods and acidified foods. So if your final pH is above a 4.6 and with a water activity of 0.85, then you'll need to have this food canning establishment registration. A big indicator is if your product is in a can, a glass, or a semi-rigid or flexible pouch. But the final indicator is going to be actually your pH and water activity. So often it's important not only to know if your product is required to have a food canning establishment registration, but it's important to know if it's not, because if not, a lot of times these products come in the port and they're in a jar and the pH balance is a certain level and the water activity is a certain level. It makes them exempt from food canning establishment, but there's no document saying that. So when it comes to port, FDA sees it in a jar and a can and says, hey, we want to stop this shipment. We're going to analyze further, check the pH, check the water, and see if this is truly food canning. Well, you could avoid that detention or delay, should I say, by simply already knowing the pH balance and the water activity of your product and having that listed. And at Registrar Corp, we actually print certificates of exemption for FCE SID so that our clients who are shipping, because sometimes, like I said, it looks like an FCE SID, but it's not. So, but it's great to have an exemption certificate so that the FDA doesn't delay doing that investigation. And the FCE registration must match the food facility registration. That's another thing. A lot of times people have an FCE SID and they've changed locations, and now the registration no longer address matches the FCE SID, food canning establishment registration. So it's important to have that. Now the SIDs, you'll hear people in the industry say, do you have an FCE SID? Well, the FCE is a food canning establishment registration itself, and the SID is the process filings for each and every product and package size. So if you have a jar that's 2 ounces and you have one that's 4 ounces, you're going to have an SID for the 2 ounce and the 4 ounce, because the process filing is different in the sense that the smaller the container, the less time you're cooking it, or you're doing something a little bit different because of the volume or the size of the package. So FDA wants to take that into account and say you have to have an SID for each and every product or package size. And that is something that often happens with our people. They'll come, they'll ship, and they will have one SID but 3 different size products in their shipment. That's not going to fly. FDA will detain that because they should have 3 SIDs for 3 different sizes and 1 FCE. That's the food canning establishment registration. Okay, so we have a wizard here just to let you know, if ever you're in doubt, you're not really sure if you are required to have an FCE or if an SID is valid, you can go to these sites and check them out. It's free of charge, doesn't cost anything, and it's just a quick way to verify an SID and then also to confirm if your product is in need of an FCE. Again, that's food canning establishment and SID verifier. Okay, there have been some labeling changes. They've happened over the last couple of years. Most of you might be familiar with it. We'll just do a quick overview on that. The old format here, you had the calorie count very low. You had the sugars just listed as total fat and carbohydrates, and the sugars up here. And now FDA is saying, now let's zoom in a little bit more. Let's look at this nutritional facts panel and make it more readable and clear to the public. So what they did is they put a new mandatory declaration for vitamin D, potassium, and added sugars. Vitamin A and C are now voluntary. I guess in the United States, we have a lot of potassium deficiencies. We have diabetes issues. So the sugars, the potassium, vitamin D deficiencies, FDA wants to highlight those in the nutritional facts panel. So therefore, that's why they're making it mandatory to declare it. Vitamin A and C, we seem to be doing well with, eating lots of oranges, doing well. So we don't have to. That's now slipped to a voluntary declaration. Calories from fat may no longer be declared. FDA is saying that, fat, while it's, everybody's paying so much attention to the fat that often they're not looking at the sugars. They're also looking at a new definition for dietary fiber, new units for vitamin D, niacin, vitamin A, vitamin E, folate, and folic acid. So it's super important that you're aware of this because, again, FDA is not doing this to make things complicated. It's recognizing some areas of concern in the U.S. Citizens' health, and therefore they want to address it and highlight it, areas where it could help eliminate that problem. So you'll see again in this label here that the calories are now larger, 230. You're going to see that. The serving sizes have changed. FDA has recognized the fact that Americans are eating, a serving to an American, it might be different than that of a European or someone from Africa. So they want to make sure they've updated the serving sizes. And then, like I said, with the total sugars, before they had just total sugar 12 grams. Now they're going to put in here, how much did you add in the added sugars? They want the consumer to know that this product came with 12 grams, but somebody just added a whole nother 10 grams, and that's in there. And then, like we said, the vitamin D and so on down here, you will see those changes. And here's another highlight of that. And again, so it's important. The label is the #1 reason why people, another reason why shipments are detained, because the label, and it's just quite clear. It's probably the easiest thing that you can fix, and people just don't fix it. But I always tell people before you ship, get your label checked, whether it's by us, Registrar Corp, or some other entity. Please do that because that's like your calling card. And so FDA updated the daily reference values here, and you'll see them here. And you can just kind of quickly peruse these total fats of, and so on, total carbs and potassium. These numbers have all changed, again, reflecting health concerns on the American citizen side. So FDA said, hey, we need to look at that sodium, we look at the calcium levels, and they made changes. So, and you see here also with the added sugar at 50 grams. And then these are rack values. And again, this is what FDA uses to look at measurements or sizes of what you normally an American would eat at a serving. So the appetizer sizes have changed, the after dinner confectionery, and so on. So again, just you need to be aware of that. Okay. And I think I'm being, hold on one second here. Okay, so these are your label changes here. I think, Coach, are you trying to reach me? 1 second. Okay, I think you guys are trying to reach me. Hold on.
It's okay, Quelly, you can proceed. You're left with 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you. Sorry, and I can see your WhatsApp if you want to communicate with me that way. Okay, good. All right, so we'll go back to, okay, sorry here. Okay. All right, so here you have the compliance dates for labeling. January 2021 for the small businesses and the regular 2020. So if you haven't changed your labels, get them changed. Do not ship to the United States without having the labeling changes done, and we can assist with that. Okay, so the Food Safety Modernization Act. Okay, so we've got the labeling changes, we've got the registration, we've got FCESID, we talked about prior notice, now the food safety plan. FDA came up with a new regulation that the deadlines have now passed for 2018 and 2019 for the food safety plan, where it said, you know what, we have food safety plans for seafood. That's called HACCP. We have safety plans for food canning establishments. I mean, you know, very high risk foods were having some type of requirement where they had to document their processing. And FDA realized, hey, we don't do that for the muffins. We don't do that for, you know, the regular food, the processed foods and cookies and things. So basically they came up with a food safety plan. And now if you manufacture, process, or package food, you must have the Preventive Controls Regulations Food Safety Plan, okay? It's under the regulation Preventive Controls, very similar to HACCP. It's called HARP-C, Hazard Analysis Risk-Based Preventive Controls. And so you have to have this food safety plan. You must have a designated PCQI at your facility, and it must be signed by them and completed by them. And this kind of goes through, the food safety plan identifies and evaluates risk and concerns. So, and this is kind of like a list of the biological, the chemical, and so on. I'm going to expedite through this. You guys will get a copy of this, but this is kind of a breakdown of the Preventive Controls HARP-C food safety plan. And so on, exemptions and modifications. There are some modifications quickly. Exempt is juice and seafood. They already have HACCP. Alcoholic beverages exempt, they're low risk. Dietary supplements, they're modified. USDA is exempt. Farm is exempt. They have produce safety. And qualified, very small businesses can be exempt. So definitely want to make sure that you have your food safety plan. FDA will be checking for those, and so if you are shipping your product to the United States, make sure you have it. Then we have, and I just want to kind of point out, FDA is really putting their foot down and making sure the importer is responsible for knowing all about the exporter that they're doing business with, the foreign company. And so they sign up, a lot of them, to something called the Fda Compliance Monitor. And this is where they could actually monitor you guys as a company and look at your status, your FDA compliance status. So I really implore everyone here that make sure you follow the regulations, because you really need to make sure you're registered, you do your prior notice, you have your labeling, you do the low acid canned foods registration if that is needed, investigate more if you are not sure. The food safety plans, please have them, and we can help with all of that with you. And we really encourage you to follow those. And I'm going to just click through here. This is the HACCP plans, focuses on preventive hazards for seafood and juice. So if you're a seafood and juice company, you don't have to do the food safety plan of HARP-C that we just talked about. You'll do the HACCP plan. And so if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's what we do. We're super excited to help anyone. Coast will tell you I'm very passionate about this. You know, and if you get it right the first time, you don't have a history of violation with FDA, and your importer will not be fearful to do business with you. And that's the end of my presentation.
Quelly Anderson, thank you for the presentation. We can tell that this is a doable exercise. Thanks for demystifying and unpacking the process. It is important definitely for us to understand that the US government is going to protect its citizenry from consuming unsafe food products. So hence these regulations. We have to comply. There's no way we can make it to the US without complying with the FDA regulations.
Yes.
But thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Right. So now I call upon Janine, author from Wesgro.
Thanks, Cos.
Right. So Janine both hails from one of our key regional partners, Wesgro. She's an economist with sound financial background. Agoa has been around for 2 decades. Have we done justice to the trade framework? So Janine will give a regional perspective on Agoa utilization. Over to you, Janine.
Okay, let's do this. Okay, you bear with me for 1 sec. There we go, slideshow. Okay, a very good afternoon to you all, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on Agoa and the utilization specifically by the USAID Trade Hub's priority countries as well. But, following on from Jan and Quelly's very insightful presentations, just a couple of pointers with regards to the eligibility of countries in terms of actually qualifying for Agoa. And in 2020, President Trump has designated 38 sub-Saharan African countries as beneficiaries of the Agoa program, and the 11 non-designated countries. And this is one less than we saw in 2019. Cameroon had their status revoked on the 1st of January this year due to ongoing concerns about human rights violations as well, though. So just to kind of contextualize the size of the Agoa program, the value of all exports to the US by Agoa beneficiary countries in 2019 was close on $20.4 billion. And the total value of imports from the US by these countries, these sub-Saharan African countries, totaled about 13.9, close on $14 billion. So they ran a trade surplus with the US of about $6.4 billion last year as well. On to the next slide, which talks about the top 5 Agoa eligible countries' total exports to the US in dollar value terms. South Africa was the certainly dominated, exporting close on $7.64 billion worth of products to the US last year. Nigeria followed at close on $5 billion, Angola in 3rd place, $1.04 billion, Ghana 4th position, $961 odd million, and the Ivory Coast at $925 million. Just to make a point here, this is not just under Agoa, this is under all special import programs to the US. So it's across the board, all import programs, and certainly all products as well. So, and within each country, depending on the nature of the diversity of their economic base, a wide variety of products certainly are exported to the US as well. On to the next slide, whereby we actually talk about the top, the values from a product sector perspective. Oil and gas dominated exports to the US, stands to reason given the continent's wealth of gas and oil reserves. Apparel and accessories came in at a distant second at close on $1.22 billion. Transportation equipment far less at $345 million. Primary metals, and then agricultural products in fifth position as well. It's important to note that not all goods are exported to the US under the Agoa program. And like I touched on very briefly a couple of minutes ago, there are a number of programs that exports are actually, and their products are exported to the US. And of the $20.4 odd billion worth of products that were exported by these sub-Saharan African countries, beneficiary countries to the US in 2019, you can see over here that the majority of these products actually went into the US under the no program claimed status, where close on $12 billion worth of products were exported to the States under no program claimed. In second position was Agoa, excluding the GSP program, which Jan has mentioned previously, and that was close on $7.3 billion. So, and the rest, the small margins that were left over were the GSP for the LDBC, and that stands for the lesser developed beneficiary country, and GSP excluding GSP. And then also we had a very small percentage going on pharmaceuticals and then civil aircraft as well. So it's important to note that not everything actually takes advantage of the Agoa program. And once again, this actually speaks to what Jan spoke of earlier, that many beneficiary countries are not taking full advantage of and utilizing the tariff lines that are available under the Agoa program. And that's what I'm speaking about. It's, Agoa utilization rate certainly differs greatly on a country by country basis. And yes, South Africa is certainly dominated in dollar value terms, exporting $7.6 billion worth to the US in total. And the value of the exports under the Agoa program, excluding the GSP program, was $1.22 billion in 2019. But if you do the calculations, that's only 6 of South Africa's exports to the US were making use of program. But if we cast our eyes down to the bottom of the slide, look at Lesotho. Lesotho is in terms of their utilization, far higher percentage rate at close on 90%, whereby over $300,000 worth of their exports of a total of $334 million worth, apologies, actually go under the Agoa program. So they have a far greater utilization rate of the as does Nigeria, as does Congo Brazzaville, as does Kenya. And we know, for instance, Lesotho certainly does take full advantage of the Agoa from an apparel perspective as well, more so than actually from an agricultural perspective. Then turning our attention to the USAID Trade Hub's priority countries, as mentioned earlier, we have, these are Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia, Eswatini, Botswana, and South Africa as well. On this slide, this gives us an indication just of what the total value of these countries' exports under the Agoa program were to the US in 2019. As I mentioned earlier, South Africa dominated, exporting $1.23 billion worth of exports under Agoa to the US, followed by Lesotho at $301 million, Malawi at 43, Mozambique at just over $1.7 million, then Namibia far less, 1.38, Zambia, and so forth and so forth. Botswana very marginal in terms of their exports under the Agoa program, excluding GSP to the States. That's not to say that they don't export to the US. They do certainly export, but a large percentage of this goes under other special import programs to the US, either no program claimed, which seems to be the largest one as well. Then turning our attention specifically to the food and beverage and agricultural exports of to the US under Agoa in 2019. If we look at South Africa, we exported $288 million worth of food and beverage and agricultural products to the US in 2019, and that was out of a total of $1.23 billion worth. So approximately 24% of all Agoa products exported to the US last year were food and beverage products. Macadamia nuts, we've seen a sharp increase in nuts to the US in recent years. Wine, oranges, cane sugar, mandarins. Lesotho in turn, just over $60,000 to the US of food and beverage and agricultural products. Very low percentage of all of their Agoa exports. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, a large percentage of their exports to the States under Agoa are of an apparel nature. Similarly, for Malawi, we have a look at their total food and beverage and agricultural exports were $41.7 million, very high percentage. It was almost all of their products under Agoa to the US in 2019. There again, a high utilization rate. Tobacco, macadamia nuts, cane sugar, nuts, not otherwise specified or indicated, that's what soy stands for. Mozambique, similarly, all of their exports to the US were of an agricultural nature in 2019 as well. Cane sugar, macadamia nuts, and tobacco. Very briefly, Namibia, very small percentage of their Agoa exports to the US last year were agricultural or food and beverage in nature. Meat or bovine animals. Zambia, very small percentage as well, only $65,000, very, very small. And that was of Zambia's total exports of about $1.25 million worth of Agoa products, so fairly small as well. And Eswatini, very high utilization rate as well. Cane sugar going out to the US last year. And then what I would like to spend a little bit more time on is Agoa and the Western Cape's food and beverage sector, which is obviously something which is very important to our province, given the very important nature of the food and beverage sector that plays a very key role in the Western Cape. But before I focus on the Western Cape in particular, I think it's worth touching briefly on South Africa's agriculture and agribusiness sectors. And the agricultural sector plays a key role in our country's economy and accounted for close on 10% of total export earnings in 2018 at a value of close on $11 billion. And we, South Africa, are the largest fresh fruit exporter in Southern Africa. And fresh fruit accounts for approximately 35% of South Africa's agricultural exports. And globally, South Africa is the second largest exporter of citrus fruit, second only to Spain. And what's important about this diagram here is that the production of fruit actually takes place across the country. But as you can see from the graph, the Western Cape certainly dominates in terms of production. There's a high intensity, specifically from a deciduous fruit perspective as well, though. So that stands us in good stead from a food and beverage perspective and agricultural perspective as well. Then just touching on Agoa, and as many of you well know, the Western Cape in South Africa has been having drought conditions despite this. And, challenging global economic conditions in recent years, trade flows between the Western Cape and the US remain strong, with local export earnings with the US totaling $623 million last year. That was down from $684 million in 2018. But the point is, it still is relatively strong. And the province has recorded a positive trade balance with the US since 2015. And like I mentioned, given the broad diversity of the Western Cape's economic base, Agoa is of relevance and applicable to a number of key economic sectors in the province. And that, in particular, the ones we focus on is agriculture and agribusiness. And 18 of the province's top 25 exports products to the US in 2018 were Agoa eligible. In terms of the Western Cape's agricultural sector, we certainly are the largest growing region of deciduous fruits in South Africa, accounting for close on 72% of total growing area of our country's growing area and production areas. And the Western Cape's local agriculture and agribusiness sectors are key, and they certainly are the source of many of our Agoa eligible products. South Africa is the 5th largest exporter of fresh pears globally, that's by metric tons. And the Western Cape on its own accounts for almost 80% of South Africa's pear production. And South Africa as well is the 6th largest exporter of fresh apples globally by metric tons. And our province accounts for close on 80% of South Africa's apple production. And that in turn certainly feeds into the food and beverage manufacturing industry as well. Just in terms of the province's agricultural wins, with the US, 3 out of the province's top 10 exports to the US in 2019 were agricultural products. We had citrus fruits as the 4th largest exported product to the US last year at a value of $49.3 million. And statistics which have come out in the last week, we expect a bumper citrus export season this year as well, and reaching a record high with 60 tons shipping from Cape Town to Philadelphia, and that certainly is almost a 10% increase on the previous record that was attained in 2018. Wine, which is another key sector for the Western Cape, that was our 5th largest export to the US in 2019, and certainly the 2nd highest agricultural export to the US at close on $37 million last year. The processed fruit and food sector, many products of which are Agoa eligible, we have many of those, and we've seen a significant increase in local fruit and nut exports to the US in recent years as well. The next slide just touches very briefly on the expanding agribusiness footprint. And the Western Cape is the largest exporter of agribusiness products of the 9 South African provinces. It certainly is a key component of our local economy, and it contributes significantly to the region's exports. And the region also hosts many businesses that operate at various points in the agribusiness supply chain, including inputs and production and processing and marketing and distribution of products as well, though. And the Western Cape is responsible for almost half of South Africa's agribusiness exports. We export 70% of our country's beverages and spirits and 96% of wine, which stands to reason as it is the dominant wine growing region in our country as well, though. And we certainly have a number of competitive advantages for the sector as well. We've got really good infrastructure. We've got access to various agricultural products and fish stocks. And certainly we have a number of tertiary institutions which are highly focused on not just food and science, nutrition and development, but certainly in terms of plant development and sciences around those as well. So those certainly are a boon for the sector too. Very briefly, in terms of the food and beverage sector, Cape Town certainly is an established hub for national production and distribution of produce and beverages, and we are home to some of South Africa's largest companies in the food and beverage manufacturing industry. We've got a booming local F&B sector, and that's largely as a result of, we have a, strong agribusiness sector, as I've touched on. We have a large international port. We've got an ever-growing consumer population and relatively strong skills base. And the food and beverage sector now is one of Cape Town's largest manufacturing industries and contributes 3.6% of Cape Town's GDA and 4.1% of formal employment. So it certainly has become an increasingly important sector of our local economy as well. We also have a very strong focus on, and an ever-increasing focus on halal-focused manufacturing as well, though, and that's in accordance with our province's mandate. Just in terms of some success stories, which I think are very important to share, and this is both from a South African and a Western Cape perspective. As many of you know, well, as we know, in March this year, Rhodes Food Group won a contract to export pears to Walmart. That's a really big thing, and so that's something which is in the process of being established. PepsiCo recently acquired Pioneer Foods. That was approved in March this year. That's a $1.7 billion deal. And the deal is one of the snack food giants' biggest investments outside of the US. That's really a big thing for us too. We've got Starbucks set to open its first outlet in Cape Town in November 2020. And there are a number of others which aren't specifically food and beverage focused. We've got Amazon Web Services went live in Cape Town in April 2020. And a number of the big companies who have and continue to invest in our city and in our province, have time and time again have said, the resilience that the city does show certainly stands us in good stead in terms of investment inflows as well, though. And one that springs to mind is the water crisis we found ourselves in a couple of years ago. So it certainly does bode well in terms of conjuring up confidence in terms of the Western Cape's ability. And with that, I thank you.
Janine, thank you so much for the presentation, for the picture regarding Agoa utilization. The picture for me shows that companies and countries are taking advantage of Agoa, but there is room for improvement. Utilization is still low. Thanks so much for the picture and also for drilling down to the province, Western Cape. And from what you have shared with us, it shows why Wesgro and Western Cape are part of a big partner when it comes to export special foods to the United States. Some of the companies like Rhodes Foods, we've worked with them, and there are other success stories that emanate from Western Cape as well that I haven't shared. Okay, thank you so much, Janine. Right. Now I call upon Ruby Swigler. She's also with Wesgro. So you can't mention special foods in Western Cape and leave out Ruby. She's the face of Wesgro when it comes to USAID trade interactions with the sector in the province. Ruby has accompanied special food firms to various international trade events, including the Summer Funds Food Show in New York. We'll talk about Summer Funds, an equivalence of Summer Funds Food Show towards the end of this program. So Ruby, it's over to you.
Thank you, Cos. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. It's an honor for me to be here and to be a partner with the Hub again on this platform, explaining the importance of Agoa, and I thank you and welcome to all the attendees on our call today. As mentioned, I'm Ruby Swigler and I'm the Senior Export Trade or Export Manager rather at Wesgro, our provincial agency. So let me bring up my presentation. I know we are a bit concerned about time because I'm going to try and watch my time so you don't have to be too concerned on the other side. Let me just see if you can actually see that. Application window, almost there. And then we'll be able to start. Okay, you should see me. That? I'm going to take that as a yes. So Wesgro is the official provincial export promotion agency for the province of the Western Cape. And we focus on 3 core remits: tourism, exports, and investment. But there are lots smaller divisions within our agency, and they all support the main aim of growing the economy and job creation. So we're funded by the City of Cape Town and Western Cape Government and the Department of Agriculture. And that's important to note because all the services we offer to all companies based within the province, no services are going to be charged to any of those companies. And that's a great benefit, especially in these times. Also important to note is that we base our strategies on real-time business intelligence and research, and that's based on the internal research team that we have, which Janine is a part of. And so any strategy that we develop, and particularly where I'm concerned and the US is concerned, is driven by exactly that, by research and real-time business intelligence. Let me just focus on the other divisions quickly by just mentioning that we have an air access team, and I'll bring this up again a bit later, which focuses on increasing direct flights between Cape Town and the rest of the globe. We have a conventions bureau, and that's important too, so bringing huge conventions into the province that facilitate in terms of trade, tourism, and investment. And there's an important film division too, with the same aim of trying to draw those film productions right here. Just quickly, I know Janine's focused on quite a bit of the Western Cape, and I just want to draw on the importance of the United States for exports for this region. It's our 3rd highest export market, so to the value of 9.1 billion rand, so it's an important one. And I think Janine has mentioned that 3 of the top 10 exports were in the agricultural space. Just quickly again, our province has had a positive trajectory in terms of a positive trade balance. So since 2015, we've had more exports than imports between the 2 countries, or between our province and the United States. And we've identified that there are even further opportunities by mentioning the underutilization of Agoa. That's an important one, and that's something that we are trying to change. Again, the Western Cape is often seen as the agricultural powerhouse, and Janine's explained that. To a large extent, our agency is focused on the food, beverage, and agricultural sector, and supporting the sector with its exporting to the United States or to the rest of the globe. It's an important one that it has contributed to job creation within our country, and will be, the focus will continue to being so going forward. I'm going to explain what the core functions are within the export promotion space. So we'll forget about the other ones for just a few minutes. And there are 2 core functions for our division at Wesgro. We promote and facilitate the export of goods and services from qualified companies in the Western Cape. And I'll come back to the qualified bit that I've mentioned there. But we also do focus on facilitating and supporting operations and expansion of qualified Western Cape companies into the rest of Africa through focusing on facilitation where outward foreign direct investment is concerned. The reason I use qualified Western Cape companies is because we have a process and we try to follow it as much as possible. Obviously, each company is, differs to a certain extent, but we try and have companies start on our export advancement program. Such an essential program, and many companies have benefited through the years. 5 modules are covered, which would range from, understanding the basics or the fundamentals of exporting, risk management, logistics, etc. And that's offered virtually, given the COVID pandemic. At this stage, we are offering that education platform via Zoom channel, and it's 5 modules covered by a specialist in this field. And companies then start off on this trajectory, going through an export advancement program. So it's a matter of assessing the company, understanding where they are in terms of their export readiness. And we usually, more often than not, this is exactly where they'd start. Thereafter, there's a mentorship service, which is also available at no cost for any of the companies based here. So I'd implore all the attendees here, especially those, not within the Western Cape province, to actually contact the local agency, contact your trade and investment promotion agency, and find out what kind of assistance is available, particularly where it is, where it concerns getting you export ready and understanding what that entire paradigm involves. The mentorship program we also offer is of huge value. That's one-on-one mentorship that takes place, and we are involved with a Dutch organization where specialists are brought out for about 2 weeks to handle key business issues for particular companies who meet the requirements to be on that program. So it's a really great start for any company. Thereafter, we'd focus on business facilitation and promotion services, and I'll go through each quite quickly if I can. Given that the world's changed to a large extent, we had on an annual basis, our entire team has about 43, 45 missions, and that's missions out into market. I would travel out to the United States about twice or thrice a year on various missions, and that's changed. So to a large extent, we've tried to be as flexible as possible, still trying to do our roles in the business facilitation and promotion service space, but just differently. And it's a scary period, but it's exciting. Let's look at business facilitation first. We've got accessing finance, and so there, to a large extent, we'd be leaning on our colleagues at the Department of Trade and Industry. And it's not an application that we can do for companies on their behalf. It's important to guide a company and have them understand what that process looks like, the requirements, the lead times, etc., and the different kinds of options for companies depending on what they'd like to do in market. So accessing finance is largely a Department of Trade and Industry initiative and form of assistance where we'd be able to guide. Buyer and company matching is important, and this could happen either if the company was traveling into market. I would contact the South African Embassy in Washington and our consulates in Chicago, New York, and LA. And depending on the company's requirements and what they'd like to do in market, we try and arrange meetings or give them sufficient information just so that they're able to add value to that trip aboard. It is quite expensive, and you may as well make full advantage of the fact that you are going to be there. And this is a service that is available to all South African citizens and exporters that are ready to export. Next is market research and information. As an agency, I've mentioned before, it's vital that we form a basic strategy and we allow companies to do the exact same. So Janine falls within our research space, and there's we've got a range of economists who would be able to facilitate that kind of information share. We pay a substantial amount to huge databases such as Euromonitor International. So there could be a trade analysis besides a trend analysis, besides a trade analysis of which products are being shared between the United States and our local province or South Africa on a national look. Forging strong strategic collaboration and partnerships is vital, and I'll mention it towards the end again. Today is an example of exactly that. The Southern African Trade and Investment Hub has afforded our agency and our exporters to travel into market, to understand the environment and the risks involved, and that's largely been done through collaborations with companies such as Registrar Corp, dealing closely with our Western Cape companies, and there's a large, information share that takes place. And so collaborations both on large organizational levels and smaller partnerships, that's essentially vital for any kind of business facilitation that we do get involved in. We also do assist where B2Bs are concerned, and the nice thing about, or the positive outcome of being in the pandemic currently is that we're looking at largely virtual platforms to do so. And that allows exporters to actually play on equal playing field. Often when you do attend a trade show, larger companies or countries have so much more to actually, expend in terms of the exhibition stand and the kind of engagements they can have in market. And I'm really positive about the fact that these B2Bs are going to be far more targeted. Yes, we've got slightly smaller budgets, but we can have really targeted approach when it comes to these virtual platforms and have the right companies based in South Africa meet with the correct buyers in the United States. So I hope everyone will just stay abreast of what we're going to be doing in that space in the next few weeks and months to come. Promotion services are out missions. I've mentioned that before, where we travel out to the United States. So that's taking companies from our province into market and guiding them through that process. And Kaz has mentioned the Summer Fancy Food Show, which is a vital show to attend. And we have a strong Western Cape contingent every year. I look forward to doing that hopefully next year. But we also have inward missions, and that's assisting, US buyers that visit South Africa and the Western province. And that's assisting with meeting those delegations requirements. Goes across sectors, but to a large extent it would fall within a food and beverage space. And Wesgro as an agency then would try and do that kind of meet and support and host that kind of engagement. Advocacy and specialized advisory services, and that's an important one. And I think immediately of the Trade Law Center. So where Agoa is concerned, Agoa will be coming to an end as it stands in September 2025, and it would be important for all exporters in all regions to actually address what that may look like and the possible impact of that. But that kind of conversation has already started, and Wesgro believes that that's an important conversation to have so that we are prepared by September 2025 on the way forward. We'll also have access to strategic networks, and that's just really been a build-up of the years of work that we've done in market. So it's not only leading on our internal database, but also the database and the assistance of the South African Embassy in Washington and our consulates in Chicago, New York, and LA. And that adds value to any kind of inquiry or mission abroad. Lastly, in this space, the marketing of value-added goods and services is also quite key to Wesgro as an agency. In the next month or in the coming weeks, we're hoping to have a virtual platform which would allow both importers or US distributors, any interest groups to actually engage with local exporters. And I look forward to actually being a part of that and assisting local exporters with getting their goods showcased and having essential information also noted. And then the next two slides, we won't keep you for too long, but it really addresses best practice in the way forward in uncertain times. And I've chosen not to mention COVID-19. I think we've seen enough mention of that name and the pandemic. And I'd rather say uncertain times, because with uncertain times, there are always going to be opportunities. Yes, it has been a very hard time for many industries, and we've all seen the huge impact it has, but there are opportunities, and I implore companies to make use of the fact that government is trying to be as proactive as possible. We are continuously trying to improve the export enabling environment, and when I spoke about us trying to move towards more virtual platforms, it's exactly that. Being an agency, we often seeing ourselves as the middle, the interface really between formal government and private sector, and so we are able to move or maneuver slightly quicker than more established structures, and that's really why we are here and cause for our existence. So we're able to address non-tariff barriers and manage a process that is very uncertain at this stage, and it's doing workshops and seminars of this kind, making sure that we're educating our exporters. There are exporter costs. Look at the exchange rate at the moment, so being in market is going to be even more expensive than it was before, and it's really all about positive collaboration and the assistance of key organizations such as the Hub and the Department of Trade and Industry, and going forward the exact same will take place. There's always going to be ad hoc support available from our agency, and we are fairly small. There is a certain turnaround time, but we try and address either internally what those issues are. If that information isn't available internally, we usually are, in fact, we are excellent at actually referring you to where that information would be available. Flight connectivity is essential, and our agency has done significant work in this regard. We look forward to the United Airlines flight, that's a flight between Cape Town and New York, as well as Delta, which starts up, well, it was meant to start up in October, and we're waiting for international travel to start up again. But that's a flight to Atlanta from Cape Town, and that's also going to be able to facilitate trade and exports to a large extent. So we look forward to that. Also, our agency focuses on facilitating discussions with national government with respect to particular challenges, and I think one that draws to mind is the particular port challenge that we had recently, and that was an active involvement between our agency, local government, and national government to try and change the course of events there, and we've seen how that's improved. Just the last slide before in closing is to mention that we are strengthening our export promotion mechanisms. That to a large extent is going to be virtual until we can travel into market. It's important to always meet, clients face to face, but in the interim, I think we're just going to have to make full advantage of the fact that we have virtual platforms that are going to be made available. And who knows, in future, we probably have, a mixture of both taking place, which would save time and money. And I think it could work quite efficiently going forward. Key also for our success is that we've engaged with key industry bodies such as our export councils. It's important to understand what their mandate is on a national level and how we can tie into that so that we're all on the same page, all trying to grow brand South Africa and grow the economy as a whole. So there's a strong allegiance and strong teamwork that we've always held on to between our export councils and ourselves. Next is the point where the need to increase the demand for goods and services, and we spoke about the underutilization of Agoa at this stage. Janine has done an extensive amount of research, and we've leaned on a few other agencies and formal bodies to try and identify key opportunities where we could, do certain kinds of market prioritization. There's always a focus to diversify our export basket, particularly for the Western Cape, which is, has I think about seven agricultural products as their top export products, and that's globally. So to try and change that just puts us in a better position going forward, and that's something that we are always aiming to do. We've also aimed at growing our exporter base and expanding the markets that they are currently exporting to. And again, just in closing, key are the stakeholder relationships, both internally as an agency and with the external partners that I've mentioned before. But I look forward to an exciting period, daunting, but exciting, and I'm happy that Wesgro is going to be part of the way forward and finding innovative ways of helping our exporters. And I hope that everyone across the region would try and find out what the agency is offering in market to assist you. But if you have any other questions for me, please do let me know. Thank you. Kaz, was that too long? I hope not.
Thank you so much, Ruby. Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation and picking the Wesgro Export Promotion Program. I would urge other trade and investment promotion agencies in the region to also reach out to Wesgro and share some notes on how to improving your offerings. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Grant McGregor. Grant is a key resource for the special food sector. I've known Grant personally. I've known Grant since 2011, and Chest Africa Foods is one of the success stories in terms of special foods exports to the United States and Agoa. He has participated under the USAID trade-up, supported Africa Fine Foods pavilions at the Summer Fans Food Show in New York. We may talk some bit of theory, but Grant is going to provide an on-the-ground experience in terms of exporting to the US. Grant, over to you.
Thanks, Kaz. Let me just get my slide up here quickly. 1 second. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Kaz, I realize we're on time constraints, so I'll try and keep it to all the bullet points that I've got. We're a company based in Cape Town, South Africa. We're part of a larger group of South African businesses focused on the export of both fresh, dry, and value-added agro-processed products mainly from South Africa at this stage. And we export to a number of countries around the world. Just a real little snapshot here of our main countries that we export to. So it's not just the US, it's a lot of European countries, Australasia, Southeast Asia, and also into the Gulf. We export via sea freight, both conventional cargo, 20-foot containers, 40-foot containers, as well as reefer containers, which is the refrigerated containers. Up until the end of March, we had a fairly large air freight program happening, which came to an abrupt stop. However, indications look like air freight starting up again, so hopefully we can get our air freight back into the US. And as Ruby mentioned earlier, we've got 2 airlines flying out of Cape Town direct to the US. Should be by the end of this year. Delta into Atlanta and United into New York. We've attended the Fancy Food Show for many years, thanks to the help of Kaz and Ruby and everyone that's put these stands together for us. The Fancy Food Show in New York, really one of the older food shows in the US. but certainly a food show that a lot of decision makers come to. We've gained a lot out of it, and we've met a number of our buyers at this platform, and hopefully it resumes again in the not too distant future. We have a dedicated distribution network in the US and work with the South African Embassy also in New York that have also facilitated a number of meetings for us and had contacts with various supermarkets. And as I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with USAID, Southern African Trade Investment Hub, to facilitate the trade shows and also to plan inward buying missions in conjunction with Wesgro here in Cape Town. So not just are we looking to do things into the States, we're actually looking to bring US buyers to Africa, because what we've found in the past is if you get the buyer, not just with the US, but with other countries, if you get the buyer to come to your country, experience your cuisine, lifestyle, meet the people, have a look at the food facilities, and certainly in this country we've got world-class facilities. These buyers go back to either their supermarkets or their buying divisions with almost an eye-opener on what can be done here on the continent. Well, certainly here in Southern Africa, and we value those inward buying trips that we've managed to do in the past. Right, let's go to a few key points to consider. These key points are really, a lot of points here are quite generic in the sense that they are key points when looking at exporting worldwide. But we sort of drawn a couple of ones specific to the US, but some of them are more, broad brushstroke key points when generally exporting food products. I think Corey mentioned earlier, your facilities having the necessary, certifications. I've got FFSC 22000 and BRC on the slide, but for the US market, HACCP is sufficient. Have you checked out your ingredients to ensure they conform to the country? Very important. Not all countries are the same. The US is different to the European Union, and the European Union is different to, let's say, Aquis in Australia in terms of what ingredients are allowed in your products. Some countries have quite strict regulations around the dairy content in product. Other countries have regulations around honey and the amounts of honey in product. The US is no different. They have regulations around certain colorings that are included in food products. And for example, E104 and E122 aren't allowed in America. And also cyclamates are also not allowed. So, make sure that your ingredients conform to the US regulations. And I'm sure that that colleague could also assist you with that. Ingredient panel, I think that's been covered already. That's the FDA in the FDA format, the new FDA format. Does your product have more than 12 months shelf life? I've put that in there because, with transit times, the way they are, with ports that sometimes have problems. I mean, in the last 3 months, we've seen quite large logistical delays around the world when it comes to both shipping and air freight. So products that have a shorter shelf life, the clock's really, really ticking. If your product has longer than 12 months of shelf life, it allows you to get product on the water, into the supply chain, and to the retailer with enough time for the product to obviously go onto shelf and allow itself to be sold off shelf. A number of countries look at shelf life as being 50% of the original shelf life. So quite a few supermarkets now around the world won't take product into their stores if it doesn't have 50% of its original shelf life. So if your original shelf life is 12 months, then it would be 6 months. But if the original shelf life is only 8 months, then it's going to be 4. So the longer your shelf life, generally the better when it comes to exporting of food products. Do you have a recall procedure in the event of a product recall? The US, I suppose, is a market where you would need to have a proper recall procedure. Should your product have some sort of quality issue, or it might have, foreign matter, or there might be a reason that your product needs to be recalled, you would need to have a procedure in place to ensure that that happens. And the supermarkets, they insist on that recall procedure. Product liability, public liability is something that you would need to also look at for, especially exporting into the US market. And here's some more practical points around products. How many variants in your range? Your buyers, not just in the US, but all over the world, like to have a choice. So generally speaking, if you have five different flavors or get-ups in your range, they will ask you, well, what's your 3 most popular? So that generally a buyer does not want to list one product, but they won't list 5. They're looking at 2 or 3, to actually make it into a range of products. So, look quite carefully at the variety that you're offering the buyers. You can always add later, and you can always take away. So buyers also like you to be refreshing, not every year, but certainly every couple of years, taking one flavor out and introducing a new flavor. Is your product dependent on seasonal harvesting? Obviously that would be hemisphere dependent when it comes to fresh exports. Citrus obviously being exported in the winter months, and then your fruits like your mangoes and your dried fruits more in the summer months. I'm not too familiar with nuts and nut harvesting, but I know that the guys doing the cashews and the macadamias, it tends to be, they're busier during their season when they're doing the harvest. And also, if we, in the southern hemisphere being counter to the northern hemisphere, so if we're producing citrus down here, the northern hemisphere is not producing citrus, so therein lies the opportunity. When it comes to FMCG products, tamper-proof packaging needs to have tamper-proof seals. Very important, whether it be a closure or on top of a product, an adduction seal, but products need to have tamper-proof seals. That's very, very important. Expiry dates, different formats for different countries. The US has its own format when it comes to the expression of the year, month, day, and these need to be inkjetted onto products. Buyers and regulations around stickers with expiry dates are getting quite tight now, and most countries aren't accepting products that have got expiry dates on a sticker. They have to be inkjetted onto the actual product. Lead times from production. We all, sit a long way away from export markets. So, lead times become really quite important when it comes to buyers and their forward planning. And, to get your lead times right on your production are really important, because when the buyer orders something and you say it's, going to be there in 6 weeks, they want it there in 6 weeks. So, plan properly around lead times on your production. Production capacity. All buyers need to have this information because they want to know, if they're a buyer for 500 stores and you have only got capacity to produce, let's say, a container every month, 500 stores will very quickly eat up a container, and the buyer doesn't want to be in a position where he lists your products on a shelf and you're not in a position to supply. So sometimes, you need to really plan your export planning around your capacity of your business. A question that's becoming more and more relevant with buyers is the private label, buyer's own brand. A lot of supermarkets are now, cutting back on shelf space for various reasons, and private label is becoming quite a big thing with a number of retailers, not just in the US, but around the world. These are a couple of points which I'm actually going to come back to. I've just got 1 or 2 points that came through. So I just want to check the time. Okay. 1 or 2 points quickly from our partners in the US. Unique flavors in well-known categories. So if you've got a product that's got a very unique flavor from your country or from your region in a well-known category, buyers are very interested in refreshing their categories with exotic flavors. Any success stories that you might have around your products, whether it be in your home country or in other countries? US buyers in particular like to know that your product has been successful in other countries. Is your pricing compelling to what's been offered from other countries? Do you have a social media presence? Now that question is becoming more and more relevant. Are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? Do you have followers? Are you putting out recipes and talking about your product in social media? And then also something that's very, very relevant with consumers nowadays is, because products can be traced back to where they're manufactured, for a lot of consumers, they want to know where that product comes from. Who's making the product? Who's benefiting from that product? Are local communities involved? Here in Southern Africa, there's been a lot of media around protection of rhino, and some companies are taking, a certain percentage of what they're selling and putting into rhino preservation. So consumers are becoming a lot more conscious of where they spend their money and where that money is actually going to. So, if you have a story around your product and you're uplifting a community, or your business is doing something, that's good, you need to be talking about that as well. If your product has a story around its legacy, if it's if the recipe, for example, has been handed down for the last 20 or 30 years, and it's about a story. It's not just about a product on the shelf. A product needs to have a feel about it. So this last slide here, the firm is misregistered with the FDA. We've gone, I think the previous speakers have gone through that. If you want to get in contact with us here in Cape Town, you can get through contact with us through either US Trade Hub or through Ruby at Wesgro. And thank you very much for that.